PFAS is a surfactant. It's an anthropogenic surfactant, meaning human-made soap sort of thing. So it's a degreaser. It's coming off your clothing, it's coming off your rain gear, your carpets, you name it. These chemicals are really good at what they were designed to do. The problem is they get into the environment. If we test that water right there, it'll have some concentration of PFAS in there.
You can't see them or even really feel them. They're tasteless, but they're in the food we eat, the water we drink, and in the air we breathe. These toxic chemicals, including per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, also known as PFAS, make their way into our water and soil through products like insecticides and are used in industrial and consumer items like nonstick dishes and things like waterproofing sprays. While they've been around since the 1950s, it wasn't until early 2000s that concerns rose when PFAS began showing up in people's blood work.
I mean, that's quite recent. It's still happening right now. That's kind of the more concerning part, is that what we don't know about that. And we're learning, and we're trying to learn as quickly as we can. At this point, it's brand new. Mercury is huge, of course. DDT, PCBs, and PFAS and PFOS up and coming. And those are kind of more concerning because we really don't know what they do. Good morning.
Don Uzarski is the director of Central Michigan University's Institute for Great Lakes Research and Biological Station on Beaver Island. He leads the Great Lakes Coastal Wetland Monitoring Program for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency.
We're basically sampling every coastal wetland in the basin that's about 10 acres in size and has a surface water connection to the Great Lakes. So part of that study, the expense is getting there and having the people on hand, but we could do other projects. So we're doing this PFAS project where we're collecting zebra and quagga mussels. And because each one of them, these tiny little things, filter a liter of water per day, they're a really good indication of what is in that water. So then we can take the tissue of those zebra and quagga mussels and measure PFAS in those. And we're seeing a relationship with agriculture, of all things. So the percent agriculture adjacent to the wetland is a good indicator of how much PFAS we'll find out. But be careful, don't think cause and effect. A correlation is not causation. It is basically a relationship. So we don't quite understand what that why that is at this point. But what we're doing is we're using that as a tracer of anthropogenic disturbance or human disturbance, human impacts to the ecosystem. Because if we know it can only come from humans, it's man-made, right? So when we detect that, we know that there are other contaminants there as well. And it's just a sort of an indicator of all the disturbances that take place.
Identifying contaminated bodies of water and land sites requires a multi-agency effort. In recent years, the state has seen a significant increase of these areas. It's an issue not unique to Michigan, but one the state says it's taking very seriously.
We're out here collecting fish for the Fish Contaminant Monitoring Program, FCMP. The site here is the Pine River. We're going to be collecting bottom feeding species like carp and suckers. This is a DDT impacted site. DDT was a pesticide that was banned several decades ago, but still shows up in fish. So we're just out here looking at trends, and then we're also going to be collecting fish for the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, MDHHS's Eat Safe Fish program. Everything we collect today will be tested for chemicals that build up to high levels in fish tissue. So things like mercury, PCBs, DDT, and PFOS, and as well as other PFAS.
This is the Pine River in St. Louis, home of one of the worst chemical poisonings in U.S. history. 50 years ago, a distribution mix-up here sent toxic flame retardant into the state food supply. Eating fish from here is not allowed. crews with Michigan's Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, or EGLE, monitor water quality here along with many bodies of water throughout the state. They do so by testing the fish. In order to catch them, the boat sends an electrical current into the water, temporarily shocking the fish so they can be netted and carried on board.
There's two goals for the FCMP, Fish Contaminant Monitoring Program. The first is to collect data that can be used by the health department to issue those advisories. So when we collect fish for that, to meet that goal, we're only looking at the fillet, the edible portion, the portion of the fish that people are eating. The second goal is to look at trends of contaminants over time and across the state. So for that program, we look at whole fish. It's important to note that when we do test an entire fish, that data will not be used by the health department to issue those advisories.
Based on findings, the Department of Health and Human Services can issue warnings, closures, and advisories. Now, it's important to reiterate that all parts of the fish are tested, including the fillet. Also, not all chemicals and contaminants build up equally in different types of fish.
PFAS is a big thing with the state. We do have a surface water monitoring program for PFAS. That program is run by one of our toxicologists here at Eagle, and they get to about 4 to 5 watersheds across the state every year. So if they get a hit for PFAS that exceeds our water quality value, we'll like to follow up the following year with fish contaminant monitoring. 10 years ago, we really didn't have a good grasp on how these chemicals were building up in fish tissue. So prior to us understanding, we were looking at things like mercury that build up at higher concentrations in the higher trophic level fish that are eating at the top of the food chain, things like walleye, lake trout.
Testing for specific contaminants requires specific testing conditions. While CMU collects various water samples for certain contaminants in their labs, chemicals in the PFAS categories are sent to a dedicated lab out of state to be tested. Understanding the contaminants polluting our waterways is critically important, especially because the Great Lakes are the largest freshwater system in the world.
We're surrounded by water. We have wealth of water, and other states and countries don't. And it's easy to take that for granted. The more you have of a natural resource, the more you don't watch it. But I think Michigan's really good at doing it, saying, no, wait a minute, we're going to take care of this. And that's what you're seeing. And that's why we detect it everywhere, because we're looking and we're paying attention to it. And when we do see a hot spot, we're trying to clean it up, and we're trying to get those levels down to it's I hate to say acceptable concentrations of toxicants, because there is no acceptable. But we reduce the danger, and we set those limits at this is a low danger, but you're going to find the toxicants everywhere.
Under the state's Safe Drinking Water Act, it lists what it considers safe limits for various contaminants. According to WCMU Public Radio, guidelines for PFAS levels are reviewed routinely by the Department of Health and Human Services. But because these forever chemicals are so new, there really are no known safe limits, as researchers are still learning about them and their impact on people and the environment.